If you've got a tank of anhydrous sitting in your yard right now, or you just wrote a check for this year's DAP and potash, stop for a second, because the USDA just made an announcement that sounds like good news, and it is not good news. Not for you, not this year, and maybe not for the next 2 or 3 years either. They're putting $500 million into expanding fertilizer production in this country, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why that number, 500 million, is actually kind of a joke when you put it next to what it really costs to fix this problem, and who ends up holding the bag while everybody waits around for relief that isn't coming anytime soon. Now, before we get into the math, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because this channel calls the fertilizer market, the corn and bean market, all of it, before the number ever shows up in your local cash bid. And drop a comment telling me where you're farming from, because the fertilizer squeeze looks different in Iowa than it does in the Texas Panhandle. And I want to know what you're actually paying right now, today, at your local co-op. Here's the announcement, plain and simple. The USDA says it's investing $500 million to expand domestic fertilizer production, the stated goal being to cut reliance on imports and eventually bring prices down for the American grower. Sounds solid on paper. The money's supposed to go toward projects that are, quote, ready to move forward quickly, meaning shovels in the ground sooner rather than later. But here's the part they buried a little deeper in the release, and it's the part that actually matters to you. Even with that money flowing, farmers are not likely to see any real price relief in the near term, because most of these projects are still years away from being finished. Years. Not months. Years. And while that money slowly works its way through permitting and construction, you are out here right now paying real dollars for real fertilizer on your actual farm. Farm economist Matt Bennett ran the numbers on this just this week, and it's not pretty. If you're doing a standard 200-pound DAP and potash blend, something a lot of growers run because it's a nice round number, you're already looking at $150 an acre, and up, just for that. Now, stack anhydrous on top of it. And if you're a typical operation without your own ammonia tank on the farm, your full-service fertilizer bill is running $850 an acre, or better right now, this season. Add it up, and you're sitting at roughly $250 an acre wrapped up in fertilizer alone. $250 before you've planted a seed, before you've paid for anything else. So that's the gap. $500 million promised for a future that doesn't arrive, against $250 an acre you're paying today. Here's a question for you, and I actually want your take on it in the comments. At $250 an acre in fertilizer alone, where's your break-even sitting this year? And are current corn and bean prices even close to covering that? Now let's talk about why $500 million doesn't move the needle the way the headline wants you to believe it does. Because this is the part nobody at the press conference wants to say out loud. Josh Linville, an analyst over at StoneX, put some real numbers behind this, and they're worth hearing. He pointed out that this isn't the first time $500 million has been promised to the fertilizer industry, and the track record on moving prices hasn't been great. The biggest fertilizer need this country has, one it could actually cover with domestic production, is nitrogen. For the fertilizer year that just wrapped up, the forecast showed the U.S. needing north of 5 million tons of urea just to cover demand. And if we actually wanted to become self-sufficient on nitrogen as a country, we'd need to build a world-scale nitrogen production facility. Linville's estimate for what one of those costs to build? $4 to $5 billion. Billion, with a B. So do the math with me here. Even if the entire $500 million from the USDA went to a single company, building a single nitrogen plant, and it's not going to. It's getting spread across multiple projects and multiple companies. That $500 million wouldn't even cover the initial margin required to break ground on one facility. It's a rounding error against the real cost of fixing this. And when you spread it across several companies instead of concentrating it, the honest read is that this program probably does not move us meaningfully closer to being self-sufficient on the fertilizer this country actually needs most. Now, in all honesty, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this money does nothing. Some of these dollars will help specific projects that were already close to breaking ground, and any new domestic capacity is better than none. But let's be clear-eyed about the timeline and the scale, because that's where the real story is. This is not a 2026 fix. It's probably not even a 2027 fix for most growers. And the dollar amount, in an era where a single production facility runs 4 to 5 billion, 500 million spread thin across the industry, is closer to a symbolic gesture than an actual solution. There is one piece of near-term relief worth knowing about, and it's separate from this 500 million announcement entirely. Earlier this week, the administration temporarily suspended duties on Moroccan phosphate fertilizer imports, and the USDA itself estimates that move could cut phosphate fertilizer prices by as much as 22%. That one's worth watching, because unlike the $500 million production push, a tariff suspension can show up in your local price a whole lot faster than a facility that hasn't broken ground yet. If you buy phosphate, DAP in particular, that's the number to track over the next few weeks, not the 500 million headline. Here's another thing worth sitting with. When these government fertilizer projects actually do get built, they're not getting built at market cost. Government-funded construction runs on prevailing wage requirements across the board, which means everything about building that capacity, labor, materials, the whole project, comes in more inflated than if a private company built it on its own dime. So even the money that does go toward new capacity buys you less capacity than the same 500 million would in the private sector. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how these programs have always worked. So here's the read, and this is what you actually do with this information. Fertilizer expensive is not a 2026 problem you wait out. It's the new normal through at least 2027, and probably longer regardless of what today's headline promises. If you've got pricing decisions to make on next year's inputs, don't sit around banking on this $500 million program to bail you out, because the timeline doesn't work in your favor, and the scale doesn't either. The one thing worth actually tracking in the near term is that Moroccan phosphate tariff suspension, because a 22% cut on phosphate, if it holds, is real money in your pocket a lot sooner than any new plant breaking ground. Watch your local DAP price over the next few weeks and see if that discount actually shows up at your co-op, because that's the difference between a headline and a check. I want to hear from you on this one. What's your fertilizer bill running per acre right now in your area? And does it match up with what we just walked through? Drop it in the comments. I read every one of them. That's the story on this one. Hit subscribe if you want the next read before it hits your local bid, and I'll see you until the next video.